Welcome to episode 7 of the Forge Your Strength podcast. I am beyond excited to have my guest here today. As per usual, we're going to jump right into this. We were talking offline a little bit earlier, and oddly enough, I saw my guest here not an hour ago, and we were working out in the gym together. And it gives me great pleasure, and it's an honor to introduce my guest here, Kate Beirness. Kate, how are you?
Really? You're excited to see me? I mean,
I
I'm
am.
telling you, I'm telling you all the time that I can't do exercises. And then you're like, oh, let's spend more time together. So, no, this is awesome. Seriously, thank you for having me. And I know we've been talking about this podcast a lot in the gym. And the fact that you want me on it is pretty cool. So I appreciate you having me.
That's the thing, right? I think we spoke about this, like I said, not an hour ago. I've tried to kind of curate an experience here that's really coming from the guests that I'm hosting on here. And it speaks to your humility when I was telling you, oh, I had, Steve Spott on the guest the other day and ran through some of the list of the people that I'd had. And you were like, damn, like you've had some good guests on there. And the honest and truthful part of it is that each one of those guests would be just as honored to sit here and listen to you, because I know they'd be able to take something from it. So I appreciate you coming on.
As I said, I'm happy to be here. And I think like having different perspectives is one of the better things, especially when it comes to health and wellness.
Absolutely. And speaking of perspectives, we all, no matter where we're at in our journeys, regardless of the endeavor, there's always people that we kind of look to as influential. As much as that could be a collective effort, there are a few that stand out. Who are some of the influences that you've had that helped specifically shape your work ethic?
Work ethic wise, I think it began with my parents. I can remember as far back as I can always remember that they instilled in me that, in life, everything that you truly want takes hard work. I saw both of them work incredibly hard. And sometimes, even if they didn't say it to me, just watching what they did constantly, they were both teachers and they both poured their hearts into their jobs. And I knew that they were great teachers when other students would come up to me and be like, I absolutely love having your mom or your dad as a teacher. And I think, in every profession, you can get people who mail it in. My parents I can honestly say, never mailed it in a day of their life in their careers. And you know what? Even in retirement and watching them in retirement, whatever they sign up for, whatever they volunteer for, again, it's 110. So it definitely started with my parents. And from there, I would say just playing every sport that I could possibly play, mainly basketball. I would say it comes from teammates and coaches. And you saw that, some of the greatest athletes that I was able to play with, again, too, it was their work ethic that they instilled in me. If we go further on, because that obviously got me to where I am, when it came into broadcasting, again, too, it was more of a, see and be it. And for me, that was Doris Burke in the industry, and watching her kind of go through the 90s and early 2000s, breaking down barriers that I couldn't even imagine. And then I'd say on more of a personal level, having people like Lisa LaFlemme in the makeup room and seeing, what she was doing. And then from more of a friendship standpoint, it would be Arlene Dickinson, and just, telling me once that she wished she would have dreamt bigger. And I think like if I combine all those together, then, work ethic definitely is the number one key to all of them. But just really believing that you can do it.
Quite a list of powerful women who have shaped a lot of different industries. Is it something that you always took from an observational perspective, watching them, how they carry themselves? Or were there ever kind of intimate moments where you had a more specific element or a question that you wanted to address, or something that they specifically addressed with you?
Well, I think if we're just going from an industry standpoint, I've had the benefit of being able to talk one-on-one with each of those aforementioned women. So, I had an opportunity when she was up in Toronto I was doing a podcast at the time, to actually sit down with Doris Burke and her to story tell a little bit to me. And it's funny, I always tell the story to young women. I've never been nervous in front of a male pro athlete. I not that I don't admire what they do, or I don't think it's great what they do, but when it came to Doris, I actually forgot a question. And I can't remember in my career ever forgetting one, because I was that starstruck by Doris Burke. So that was great. And ever since, she's amazing. I mean, I don't want to brag, but we're on like a hugging level when she comes to TO now. So that's how I figured that one. And the great part is too, I wouldn't say, there wasn't an outside of work friendship by any stretch of the imagination with Lisa, but for sure the way, especially early on when she became the lead anchor on the national news, the way she carried herself. And one of the things too is I think she always took the time to talk to me. And I think that it was so small, but it meant so much to me. And then, especially when it comes to Arlene, there was more of a friendship for sure. There's more of an outside. Obviously, we don't work together. I'm not on the Dragon's Den or
Yeah.
anything like that.
Not secretly
But
one of their
no,
advisors.
no, no, no. I'm definitely not in that echelon of I'm ready to help people, invest in their companies. Maybe one day, but not right now. I think, and having more of a personal mentor like that in terms of, just thinking so much bigger than I've ever thought. And it's not that I wasn't, always thinking big. I was always thinking, oh, I can get to the top of something. I probably never believed that I could create something and I could create something of my own. And I think that's where her power kind of really took over for me, and it's opened up every single door that's come in front of me for sure.
Very interesting. I think that that moment when you're in front of someone who in your mind is larger than life brings with it kind of this like chaotic uncertainty. You don't know what to ask, when to ask. You're thinking about what you're thinking. You're also thinking about what they're thinking of you. And I think having seen you at some of the HerMark events, there's no doubt that on some level you have that impact now on other women that are coming up, this younger generation, aspiring to be in broadcasting, aspiring to work in sports in some capacity. So there's no doubt that you're kind of continuing on with this torch. Do you ever recognize those moments based on kind of that interaction that you had with Doris, or is it always just like an approach of kindness?
Well, I think it's a little bit of both. And there was a point in my career when I was probably low 30s where it's hard sometimes not to let it get the best of you. And I remember thinking to myself, I don't have time was a big thing in my mind.
Hmm.
So like we would have young students reach out to us all the time. And honestly, if I said yes to every single one, we'd be having lunch with kids every single week. It's funny because as you get older, you realize, just how much of an impact these women had on not just myself, but I know a number of my friends too. And I think to myself, I now actually have to try a little bit harder to make sure that I give my time back. And yeah, absolutely. I know now what a 30-minute lunch can mean to a young woman. And HerMark, we try to obviously bring in as many girls as possible and inspire them by having them listen and learn from some of our top leaders in Canada. But that one-on-one time is a bit of a different level. So it's not that I think I've done anything remarkable or special for sure, but I think I'm still continuing to work each and every day. But I think if I can even give them a tiny bit of what those other women gave me, then my thing is I have no idea what they could do. And that's kind of always what I come back to. I think to myself, we hopefully led the way for a certain amount of women, but what's the next generation going to do? So
Mm-hmm.
that's now constantly in the back of my mind. And as I get older, that is so much more important to me than any legacy I'll leave, is because at the end of the day, I'm going to be done broadcasting at some point. I won't be covering sports at one point, but there'll be a girl 20 years behind me, and to be able to watch her and see what she does, like that to me is the ultimate.
Yeah. And I think it's such an interesting juxtaposition because the way you get ahead, the way you succeed is it's necessary to have this kind of nose to the grindstone work ethic where everything is decidedly kind of, you take almost like an essentialist approach. You look at exactly what you need to do next. So it's easy to kind of get lost in kind of the finer details. But it sounds like what you're speaking to is the importance of zooming out and appreciating the impact that that can have at large. There's a great Jerry Seinfeld joke where he talks about the average person, their number one fear, according to the certain research he was referring to, is public speaking. And in his joke, he says number two was death. So that means for the average person, if you're at a funeral, you'd rather be in the casket than giving the eulogy. Now that you're in this seat on that side of it, where you're typically in my seat interviewing people, are there ever
Yeah.
moments of insecurity, of doubt that you have?
I would say when it just comes to personal matters, it's not anymore on a work level. It was interesting. I even did something for work a few weeks back where it was a presentation in front of all of Bell Media. So that's like, it was bigger. And going into it, it was uncomfortable because I'm not used to giving those type of presentations. TV has become second nature, and you do something for so long. And I think I've been doing it for 14 years now at TSN, and it's almost like there's another person in the room. Like you don't even think that there's a camera there anymore, which is not a good and a bad thing too. Like you
Yeah.
shouldn't really, right? You shouldn't have that. You should almost have that edge at some points. And I got out there, and it almost like it filled my soul, like being on stage and like
Wow.
pushing on myself. So it is weird when it comes to the whole like scared thing, because I think what I try to constantly find is what pushes me out of my comfort zone. Like when am I in those situations that I know I'm super uncomfortable? I would say too, now getting older, and it sounds weird because I'm on TV, being the center of attentions. I don't love it as much anymore, and I'd rather like be. I have this amazing friend group, and I think like when we as a team, put on something together like HerMark, like that to me is the ultimate. And it pushes me because I think I have to be constantly, in tune with what's going on around me. Are the girls okay? Are they having a good time? Are the people that I brought in to help and volunteer, are they okay? So I think for myself personally, it's just trying to find the thing that I'm not comfortable with. So that's kind of like
Very
my
interesting.
vision right now. Yeah, it is.
It reminds me a bit of the Taoist philosophy, like the yin and yang symbolism, where you have these two kind of competing energies, and there's evidence of each energy within the other. And sometimes it's a matter of recognizing that, and sometimes it's a matter of capitalizing on it. And I think when we think of that Last Dance documentary, MJ and even Kobe, in some of his interviews, talked a lot about like using that motivation as fuel, using that kind of doubt that people had as fuel, almost to the point where they create this self-doubt where it
Yeah.
doesn't exist sometimes, just so they can capitalize on it. But I think it's interesting hearing your perspective, which is almost like when there's something that potentially is discomforting in some capacity, just recognizing that there's an opportunity to address and acknowledge and exist in that opposite energy can be incredibly beneficial. What are some of those tactics and some of the maybe strategies that you use to slow down? Because like we talked about, life, especially with high performers like yourself, is very go, go, go. So how do you slow down?
It's really funny. I slow down by speeding up. And I think this is really interesting that, for example, doing that presentation was a really good example, right? I ran. I
Hmm.
went outside and I ran, because when I run, it blanks my mind. When I lift weights, it blanks my mind because I can't think about anything else other than, the exercise that you're putting in front of me. I took up piano a year ago just to literally make my mind concentrate on something different. I, by nature, am very OCD. If I get a thought in my mind, and that's pros and cons, right? There's a
Mm-hmm.
lot of pros of being obsessive compulsive about things, because it makes you, I will do something to completion. I
Mm-hmm.
never leave a task undone. But at the same time, if it's in your mind and it's a reoccurring thought, then yeah, that's actually problematic. So how I've always dealt with it has been by distracting myself and obviously talking about it if it gets too far. But it's funny because I think a lot of people would turn to things like, and I do try to meditate, like I
Mm-hmm.
try really hard, right? But I think for me personally, movement and sport and like piano have always been things that blank my brain. And when you find things like that just you can shut off, and then you come back to it, you're like, well, that's not that bad. You know what I mean? Like maybe I was just overthinking this, or even when leading up to that presentation. And I think the thing too is I push myself to do it. So
Mm-hmm.
like even if I really, really, really don't want to do it, like there are meetings I do not want to take these meetings. I push myself to do it. And 9 times out of 10, I come out of those and think, I'm really glad I did it. And not even if it didn't work out, and even if there was no good result to it, I'm really glad I did it. The presentation from work, again, uncomfortable. I'm in a selling position, which I'm normally not in unless I'm like reading an ad on TV. But again, too, I'm like, take a deep breath, get out there and do exactly how you know how to do it. And I did. And I went off script a little bit. It was arguably one of the best presentations I've ever made in my life. So I think like pushing yourself to doing it, to doing something you don't want to do, and knowing you as a human, how your brain operates is so critically important.
There's such an interesting self-awareness piece that you're talking about. And I think sometimes getting caught up in what the answer is can inevitably add more stress because there are so many different options. And for you, you talked about piano and things of this nature, going for a run, lifting weights that help you kind of externalize some of that focus and stress. I think what the important part there as it relates to self-awareness is appreciating that there is no one size fits all answer here. When you find that kind of stressful, discomforting moment, experience, whatever it is, for some people, it's going to be down regulating, doing something chill. For other people, it's going to be exactly what you talked about. Tell me a little bit about your on-air routine right now, your pre-on-air routine, because you're obviously incredibly experienced and you're so far into your career now. Has it changed at all, or are there certain things that you do that are kind of still the same as you've done all along?
I just go on air and let her rip now.
There you go.
No, it's changed so much. And okay, I'll take you back to when I was 25 and got hired at TSN. It was 2009. And I'm not kidding you. In the trunk of my car at that point, I had the NHL pronunciation guide. So I read this thing at night like it was the Bible. Like I
Wow.
literally would go through this thing. And here's the thing when it comes to national TV, and they always tell you this with television. They said, screw up in the local levels. No one will really ever know. And I'm just honestly, I'm really happy that there was no social media when I first got in. Social media came in around like 2012, I think 2013, it kind of hit. And I'm like, I remember how much I screwed up on air from 2009 to 2012. And I'm like, thank God. Yeah. So needless to say, I remember coming up on an update once and saying, and Tiger Woods is, instead of sitting second, I said beeping second. I was like,
No
oh my,
kidding.
and oh, you got to see my eyes. Like, but no one has the clip because it's too old, right?
Yeah.
But needless to say, I mean, look, these are the things you have to go through. And I stress this so much because this is something that I think, and I try not to get wrapped up about it because, I obviously operate a certain way and it bothers me when other humans don't operate this way but still want like success.
Yeah.
And that's the one thing I stress a lot too is failure. And I think when you screw up on air, you're never going to do it again. Trust me. But to get back to pregame routine, if you will, other than reading the pronunciation guides, I used to in my car, I had a 45-minute drive to work. I would like pretend I was coming up on camera, like I'm driving on the 401. And I'd be like, and welcome inside the Sports Center newsroom. My name is Kate Beirness. We'll get you back to Wimbledon in just a moment. But first, let's get you caught up on what happened tonight. I'd be
No
reading these
kidding.
highlights and then I'd get to work and it would still be like walking up onto that set, still getting a little bit nervous, like that side of it. And then it just kind of clicks. And it's like by osmosis, I think I've read every single hockey player's name. I've read, majority of the NBA, the NFL, all that. And you're just like, okay. And then, so then Sports Center became really comfortable, right? You could show up, do a show, no big deal. And then I got pushed into hosting, and hosting is a completely different animal. And I think with hosting, the really neat part about it, and which I love about it, is you have to go in prepared. Like Sports Center, you get scripts and everything like that. But in hosting, if you don't know what you're talking about and you're caught, we were caught, for example, this past weekend, 90 minutes, Phil. So a 90-minute live show with nothing. If you don't know what you're talking about in there, you are going to be buried. It's a sink or swim situation.
What does that
And I
mean?
think
Fill meaning that there's no content?
so yeah, basically it's a weather delay in sports. So when you're
Oh, wow.
hosting, this is your one thing, and especially well, NBA, obviously there's never going to be a weather delay, but doing the CFL, you are guaranteed. I'm going to say 2 nights a year, you're doing a nice fill show on
Wow.
national TV with, and look, we have great producers and we have people who will feed us content as the night comes, interviews, hits from the booth, whatever it may be. But you're coming live on air and you have no idea how long you're on for and you have really no direction to go. So, we start with, let's talk about the experiences of my analysts and their experiences with weather delays and how this changes the game. And then we break down the game a little bit more. But as a host, if you don't know, if you don't know questions about the game or like intricacies about football, then you're screwed essentially.
Yeah.
So I would say my level of preparation for being a host versus being on Sports Center. I mean, I work definitely as hard as both. I say this all the time. I don't think I've ever come into a broadcast where I'm not confident in what I'm saying. And that all is preparation, and it's all reading constantly. It's listening. It's, as good and bad of social media, it's reading social media. So I think, and that for me, that's everything. And you talk about Kobe Bryant. I mean, people just see the game. They don't see every single thing that went
Mm-hmm.
into it. Yeah.
Yeah, I love how you brought that full circle. It's the old Mike Tyson, right? Everyone's got a plan until you get punched in the face.
Yeah.
Sometimes there's a 90-minute weather delay and you get punched in the face, and there you are. But again, relying on that preparation is crucial. Tell me a little bit about the genesis of HerMark, because we've worked on a couple of these events, and I'm always honored to participate in them because there's such an energy there that is palpable. And I think we've spoken about it too. Like, it's not something you really appreciate until you
Yeah.
experience it. So tell me a little bit about the genesis of it.
You know what? You're so right too. And when we're speaking right now too, when we received charity status last year, trying to explain to companies what HerMark is, sometimes all I want to say to them is just come, just show up to the event, and you will
Yeah.
completely understand what this entails. So back in 2017, a group of us decided that we wanted to do something to give back, and we've been very blessed in our industry, I would say. And we've had wonderful opportunities, and gotten to meet people and go to places that few people do. And I think it's really critically important in life to kind of recognize that, and instead of constantly looking for the next best thing, maybe giving back is actually the next best thing that you can do.
Hmm.
So we all believed as a team too how critically important female mentorship was to females. It is a remarkable thing, in my opinion, when a female tells you, an older female especially, you can do it. You can be whatever you want to be. Like, we're in 2013 now. We're not back in 1960, right? It is remarkable what women have done. And also too, and I stress this as well too, because I see you're rocking the shirt, and there's a great team of men in HerMark too, men who believe and who support. You know what I mean? Because the scale has been so tipped for so long that I think now, knowing that we can all work together and help our next generation is the best. But essentially, we wanted to focus in on girls 15 to 18 years old, because those are the most formidable years when it comes to certain influence in their lives. And I don't think social media has done an overall great job of helping that whatsoever. There's more pressure than ever on girls, in my opinion. And I think by bringing them into this summit, and my friends, I couldn't have better friends, let's say that too, who have accomplished the greatest things that you could ever imagine in terms of sport, and they want to do this too. But when you hear them talk so candidly and speak so candidly about, failures, as we were talking about, mental
Mm-hmm.
health, eating disorders, like, let's go through the list here for young women. And then these girls that are of this age hear this from their idols. I can't even tell you what that may do for a young woman. And look, we're not going to get through to every single one of them. We absolutely know that. But heck, if we get through these summits and we're hitting even a few at each and every one, it'll be a game changer, in my opinion. You're going to have, again, a better next generation. So I think, as you said too, to be at the event, the energy of this thing is off the rails. And now we get to take it across Canada and just hopefully impact as many young women as possible.
It really is such an emotional experience. I can remember even at the most recent one in Toronto, the scholarship aspect of the day. I was, you can literally feel the hairs on your arm standing up, damn near tears coming down. And I think, from my perspective, I don't know if I've ever shared this with you, but it was almost the first time I went, it was almost intimidating for me, because it's like you're so aware of the possibility, the energy, the impact, the importance of what this day represents for so many people, that you don't want to screw up. And so contributing to it in any way is not something that's lost on me in terms of its importance. So I appreciate that. Speaking of some of the athletes that these young girls are looking up to, you spoke about some of your influences professionally and even personally. Who were some of the athletes that you looked up to?
In terms of when I was a kid or now?
Let's go both. Let's go one when you were a kid and one now.
I think, like, when I was a kid, the WNBA was just coming to in the mid 90s. So I was a young basketball player, and that for me was obviously something special. And it's really interesting now, having friends that had played on the national team in the 90s. and the fact that I never saw them on TV.
Hmm.
And that to this day bothers me, because I think if I would have seen these women on TV, it would have made a whole world of difference for me. So this is why this is so critically important too, that thank goodness, the women, they just announced that there will be a women's hockey league, thank God. But, talking to Cheryl Pounder, and they would wear pink jerseys to be more appeasing to the audience. And I'm like, you got to be kidding me. Like, but I think if I would have seen Cheryl Pounder on TV as a
Right.
kid, I would have been not, I don't want to date Pounder here, by the way, but I'm just saying, like, I would have been, whatever, even being 13, she's in her 20s. I'm like, okay, that would have meant the world. So I'm excited that what I'm trying to say is that the next gen gets to see these amazing athletes. But for me, I think playing basketball, Cheryl Swoops was given her own shoe. And I remember being like the first time seeing that, and God bless my mom. She drove me down to Chicago and got me the shoes, right? Wearing, as a young female, wearing another woman's shoes meant the world to me. I felt like I was the greatest basketball player on earth because I was wearing Cheryl Swoop shoes.
Hmm.
And I think that was one of the coolest things, in my opinion. And I just think even to this day, the fact that we're still fighting for women's sports the way we are is just absurd. And then, I marvel at my friends and their athletic abilities for sure. I mean, look, we could talk about Kia, Marie-Philippe Poulin, Tessa Virtue. You can keep going down the line here. But the commonality between all of them, and as much as I love how great they are at sports, sure, they're just good humans.
Hmm.
So it's a little bit different for me, for someone like I idolized as a kid, like Cheryl Swoops, and then people that I actually get to associate with. Because I think as you get older, you just surround yourself with people that you want to be. I want to be around my friends because of who they are as human beings, not because of what they do athletically.
Hmm.
And as I said, is it not great? Yeah, but I
Right.
think they would flip that around. And not that I've accomplished anything close to what they've accomplished, but I think all of them would also say they'd like to be around me because of who I am as a human, not because of the fact that I'm on TSN. So I think as you get older, it gets a little bit different, and you just look for people you want to surround yourself with, because as they say, surround yourself with who you want to be.
That perspective element again, where you kind of take stock of what's truly important, that might change over the years. Tell me a little bit more about Kia specifically, because I know for someone with that level of talent and for as big as she is as a star, she always carries herself with a certain level of humility. Did you at all take her under your wing when she came to TSN?
I mean, she's so talented that she would have figured it out. Let's say
Yeah.
this, right? I To this day, I mean, I am blown away by everything she does and how hard she works at everything. I mean, she comes into every broadcast and you should see her notes. I mean, she's special. And I think when you find people like that in this world, I mean, all you want to do is kind of be surrounded by them. So I think, yeah, I mean, I definitely try to help from a broadcasting perspective. And I tell her all the time, she's living out my dream of being a WNBA player. But at the same time, the fact that we get to work together, at TSN and on the level that we do, is something special, and I'm proud to have her as a friend. And her talent level blows me away, but again, too, beyond the talent, an even better human.
Yeah, having had the pleasure of working with her briefly, it was all those things stood out, and it's no surprise that she takes that preparation anywhere she goes. Um, Tell me about a moment where what was one of your like I was here when sporting moments? You remember watching X happen.
Okay, well, first of all, I mean, I would love to tell you all the women's sports, but the problem is, I think I'm a total jinx now. This is my no, like it is, and I'll tell any of my friends this as well. And the only time I've actually gone to the Olympics was 2018 in Pyeongchang, and yeah, the women unfortunately lost to the United States in that one, and then more recently the Women's World Hockey Championships, and we were there, and again the United States. And then look, we're talking like Canada wins like 10 times out of 11, right? And I'm just bad luck on that end. Let's say that, right? So what I'm telling you is one day I'd like to tell you that it's a women's event, but in the meantime,
We'll
where
settle.
were you? Where were you there's no doubt on that one. In the Toronto Raptors locker room when they won the championship. And that one again too, it's not lost on me that I got to do something that night that I would have never even dreamt of as a kid. And being a basketball player and having the privilege of covering that team in 2019, which to this day is one of the greatest sporting teams I'll ever cover in my entire life, is it's just a moment I'll never forget. And it was, I actually thought it was the worst night of my broadcasting life because I was scheduled to interview Kyle Lowry, but there's a rule in the NBA: as soon as they hit the stage when they win, you cannot talk, you can't talk to them anymore. So I was like, oh my God. And I'm hitting what's called a talk back button on my microphone. I said, Kyle went to stage, I can't get him. Like, and they're like, you have to get him. And I don't fully remember what happened, but Kyle or someone on the stage said, to the locker room. And I was like, okay, like I guess I'm going to the locker room. I have no idea.
Wow.
So I sprint to the locker room as fast as I can. And it's weird being in an opposing arena as well, because like the crowd's not there anymore. Like they're just, there's like, 100 Raptor fans, but that's it. So I'm sprinting back, and then I realized to myself, oh my God, I don't have a camera, because I ran so fast in the locker room. I was like, okay, so I got a microphone, no camera, and I'm outside the locker room at this point. And then all of a sudden, this guy opens the door. He goes, TSN? I said, yep. Flips on what's called a mic flash, pulls me in the door, and I'm not kidding you, Dante, just absolutely bombarded with champagne. And there's maybe 3 reporters, maybe 4 total in there. And then Kyle's right there. He's like, all right, let's do that interview. It's just
I
like,
love it.
and I'm like, oh
That's
my God. And
incredible.
then it was amazing. Like, for at least before they let media in, I'm going to say we were in there for like 10, 15 minutes. And I don't really even remember it that well. I remember Norm Powell pouring a Coors Light down my throat. But other than that, I had friends. It was awesome too, because back in Toronto, I didn't really realize what was happening with like everything going on in the streets. But they took a shot of I think it was Real Sports, like outside Scotiabank Arena, and it was just like us in the locker room, and that was a moment. I'm like,
Unreal.
and the only bad part is you walk into the locker room and nobody cared that they won because we're in Oakland, right?
Yeah.
So I had to wait to get back to Toronto, be like, everyone see this? Like,
Yeah.
and then I realized the gravity of the whole thing for sure.
No, we were going after, that's for sure. I think that speaks to some of the leadership that was on that team, right? Like for them in that
Mm-hmm.
moment to be able to seek you out, knowing that you had such a role to play in covering this team and telling their story, not just that year, but leading up to it. For them to, in that moment of elation where they've reached the top of the mountain, to still recognize the importance of taking care of the people around them speaks so much to the leadership component. What were some of the leadership elements that stuck out to you about that team in particular?
Kyle started with Kyle, and
Yeah.
I think the reason, oh, maybe not the reason, but I think the moment that, and here's the thing too. Look, we're doing our job, and like I'm not friends with any of them by any capacity. Like I'm not going to go that far, but there was definitely respect level for us, and I think that was the good one there. And being with that team throughout the entire playoffs, um, I think that really really helped. And those, I can't tell you how amazing those guys were to me, like just to this day, and especially Kyle. The moment things changed, in my opinion, the moment that Kyle and Kawhi really formed a relationship, in my opinion. Kawhi's your 1A, Kyle's the leader in the floor general, and then you had the perfect complements in a Marc Gasol, a Pascal Siakam, a Serge Ibaka coming off the bench, a Norm Powell, a Fred VanVleet. You could name, like, it's a perfect combination. And I think when you get a team that combines like that, there's no stopping them. And it is a team game. And you watched it this year with Jamal Murray and Jokic. It's almost the same thing. You nearly had it with the Miami Heat, and surprise, surprise, guess who's there? I just think that when it
Hmm.
comes to leadership, you sometimes don't obviously have to be the best player. And Kyle was phenomenal in Toronto, don't get me wrong. But there was something about Kyle Lowry's leadership ability that separated him from any athlete I've ever had to deal with in my life.
It's one of those things where you know it when you see it, but sometimes it's hard to describe. And I spoke about this a little bit with Steve Spot, that this idea of too many cooks in the kitchen, sometimes that doesn't work. But I think in sport, when you have that many good leaders that understand their role, they've been through so many different experiences to date that it almost doesn't matter what their role is. They're willing to accept it, and they kind of really relish it. And that's what makes it a team. Who are some of the
Mm.
members of your team that kind of help you feel comfortable, at ease with where you're at?
Yeah, TSN.
Yeah.
Yeah, so for sure. So I only cover the Raptors in the CFL now, which is great. And I have an amazing relationship with Davis Sanchez and Milt Stiegel. And Milt to me is a fascinating human as well. I mean, arguably the greatest receiver ever in CFL history. Had a couple of years as well in the NFL, and is probably in better shape in his 50s than 99% of people that I know in their 20s.
Incredible.
So you talk about a leadership role, and Milt's one of those people who leads by example. And I said this, we were having dinner out in British Columbia with the owner of the Lions. And I said, I think the greatest compliment you can give to a human is this: Milt makes me want to be a better human. And I think there's nothing better that someone can ever say to you. And I truly mean that because of the way he conducts himself as, a father, a husband, a role model. It just everything, and work ethic. Like, my God, the work ethic is just out of control. So definitely on the CFL side, I'd say those two. And look, Davis is a great time. Like, Davis is just, he's a blast. No, he is. And he's super talented as well, too. And I think the best part about having Ches there, too, is just a great friend. And I think, and honestly, the two of them, it's like two older brothers I've never had in my life, for sure. And in the NBA side, and even though Kia's younger than me, there are aspects of Kia that I totally look up to as well. So I think that that's really neat. And for Leo, an OG vet, I think, having someone that's pretty much gone through everything. Again, he'll do anything for you. If I called him right now, he'd be here. So I
Incredible.
work with, and that's what I always say too. Sometimes when you think about broadcasting, and people always ask, oh, how long do you think you'll broadcast for? I don't think about it as broadcasting as much as I think of, I get to go to a place where I really get to spend time with incredible people. And that's really, really hard to pass up.
So obviously, as a woman in a male-dominated industry, we spoke about maybe where things are at right now, and that there's still so far to go. And obviously, something like HerMark is instrumental in continuing that momentum. How have things changed in a positive way over the last, say, 10 years? What do you see differently now in that conversation around some of those narratives that you wouldn't have heard before?
Narratives, I think there's definitely a lot more respect. I always say with TSN, they're not going to put us on TV if we don't know what we're talking about. Pretty
Mm-hmm.
simple, right? But when I started in 2009, there were 5 female national anchors. We now have more female anchors than male anchors.
Wow.
So I think there is definitely a changing of the guard there. There's still so many things, I think, in sport in general that I'm surprised haven't happened yet. Now they will happen. They're going to come too. I don't know how much more females need to prove in the NBA that they can be head coaches, for example. And I think, something like that is going to make a world of difference. And a lot of the time, it just takes one. It just takes
Mm.
one, person to change so much. And the other one too, that's, I think, frustrating for myself personally, is when it comes to the NHL, and the same people continually get hired. And I just think to myself, why not a changing of the guard? Like, why not? And again, too, maybe it's not even a female. Maybe it's just, having a fresh outlook, a fresh, opinion on something sometimes. But, from a female standpoint, I think we've made unbelievable leaps and bounds for sure. My biggest gripe was always the lack of professional women's hockey as a unified league, and the fact that this just came through. It was 4 years for these women in the PWHPA fighting for it, and now it is finally won. That is the biggest step I've seen in forever. And the other one too is, Project 8 and Diana Matheson and what she's attempting to do at a grassroots level, and also from a professional standpoint, obviously having the 8 teams for professional women's soccer. That's another one too, that again, okay, we're in 2023. This should be like way ahead than it is. But
Yeah.
sometimes I think to myself, at least it's moving forward, not backwards.
That ability to step into your confidence on a professional level, What was that process like? Or was it something that you were pretty bullish on from day one, particularly recognizing that you were a female coming into a male dominated industry?
I always felt like I belonged. And I think like that's really key. TSN has always made me feel like I belong here. They never made me feel like I got hired because I was a woman. And I think
Okay.
that that's a huge part of it. I think honestly though, if I'm going to go way back for just for me personally, it's my dad. And I think, having, a dad and having a male role model that from as far as I can remember, it was, you can do anything you want. And that basically honestly always stuck with me. I also grew up in a small town where I thought that I was the greatest at everything, which really I'm not. So it's funny. Then you move to Toronto and you're like, oh God, I'm not that good. But I think a lot of those early days is just so critical. But yeah, being in an environment where, look, the expectation's high, and I don't shy away from expectations. Like they expect you to go on air and do it at the highest level in our country. Done. And I think it's just instilled in me.
Let me ask you for one piece of advice on a personal level. We'll flip roles here for a minute.
Cool.
As someone who's trying to do something impactful with this podcast on the topics of mental health, psychology, and how those impact performance on a personal level, on a professional level, and in an athletic context, what's something that I can do from an interview perspective that would ensure that I get the most authentic answers?
Oh, that is a good one. I love that. I think listen, when you're asking questions, I think the biggest problem sometimes when I listen to podcasts or interviews is they have a regimented set question in their
Hmm.
mind. And I think some of the best interviews that I've ever heard my entire life have absolutely no script to them. And obviously, you can study background, you can study whatever you want, but you'd be amazed when you're interviewing what you can get from a human being if you just listen. And I know that because of how I currently conduct interviews. For example, when we do Raptors Media Day, I'm given a set list of questions. The best content that has ever come out of those interviews are questions that were not on a piece of paper, because I took the time and I finally was like, okay, because it's very hard. You have, especially with like a podcast. Okay, I got to fill an hour episode. I'm going to ask about this X, Y, and Z, or I'm going to give an example of this. But when you really actively listen, it changes everything. And that to me is one of the hardest skill sets in life. But also the interviewers that I absolutely love listening to are the ones that I know for a fact they had no idea that that was coming.
I appreciate that so much. That speaks to an adaptability that I think, in wrapping this up, touches on every element that we spoke about today. You are one of my favorite people to hang out with in a gym setting and out. So I
You have to
appreciate
say
this a
that, by the
lot.
way.
Tip number 2 about wrapping up a podcast.
Leave it
I,
on a high note.
I appreciate you a lot. Let's do this again soon, and I will probably see you in a couple of days to clang and bang some iron.
Thank you, Dante.
See you, Kate.